So I've only been playing Dungeons & Dragons for less than a year now, and I've only created a couple of characters for the games that I play. The very first one I made was a Dragonborn Sorcerer, which was really surprising because I didn't want to do a spellcaster character. I didn't really have a lot of interest in doing Dragonborn, but somehow the more I looked into it, the more interesting it got. Then the second character I made was also a Dragonborn, but it was the Barbarian class, which was interesting because I didn't think I'd be interested in that, but the more I looked into it, the more I really enjoyed it, especially with the fact that it's a tank kind of character, and me being 6'6" and really broad-shouldered and look like a football player, I thought it'd be a lot of fun to play that sort of class in my Dungeons & Dragons game. So now I want to do a character that is completely different than any of the ones I've done before. It's something that I thought would be really interesting to play as a story, and so I decided on choosing a race I, again, did not think I would choose ever in my lifetime, but I thought a half-orc would be an interesting character to play, and a druid. So those combinations of race and class was something that I thought was really interesting and fascinating to try to play. So I started to do a little bit of research for my character by looking up half-orc and druids in the player's handbook from Dungeons & Dragons. And then I like to use Baldur's Gate 3 to get a sense of what I might want my character to look like. And so I went on there and started playing around with it. And I thought it would be really cool to do a half-orc druid that's on the older side. If we're half-orcs, are about, the life capacity is about 75 years old. So I thought it'd be great to do a 50-year-old half-orc druid. I don't know the backstory of this character yet, but I think an older character is going to be a lot of fun to play. And even though I don't know the backstory of this character, I know the name's going to be Gromm. So for this half-orc druid named Gromm, I started playing Baldur's Gate 3, kind of get a sense of what I might want to think about for this character. And I realized that I was having him wield 2 scimitars, which are 2 metal swords. Now, generally speaking, there's nothing of issue with that, but I remember reading in the player's handbook that druids typically don't wear metal armor. And I'm making that distinction here about don't wear armor because there is a difference between they can't wear it and they won't wear it. And believe me, I know this distinction because every time I try to have a conversation about it, there's always somebody that pops in and be like, it's not that they can't wear it. They just choose not to wear it. I get that. That's why it says they don't, not can't, wear armor. Anyways, so I wanted to figure out why this distinction. How come druids won't wear metal armor, but they're perfectly fine with wielding metal swords or metal weapons here? So I went online and posted on social media asking people about their input and thoughts about this, as well as going to Reddit and see what people have said about that on their posts, and even just search online to see what I could come up with. And I find it very fascinating because when it comes to why druids typically won't wear metal armor, it ranges the rationales from a lot of different people, a lot of different sources. That comes from the historical reason of why in Dungeons & Dragons they don't wear armor, to the different oaths that some of the lore says that druids have taken, to practical reasons as well too. And the nice thing about Dungeons & Dragons is that with you and the other players and the DM in the game, you can come up with any rationale that you want to justify why they may or may not wear metal armor or why they wield a metal weapon. And yes, you can make the distinction that weapon is a little bit different from armor, and it just kind of depends on your rationale and your explanation for why that is as well too. And you can go in the deep end and even say that, yes, druids typically don't wear metal armor, but my druid does because of X, Y, and Z. You can come up with a really fascinating backstory to explain that. And even though there's probably a lot of rationale and explanations, I'm sure a lot of people will probably chime in to say, here's historically the reason why, or why the lore inside of certain games or campaigns would be the reason why. I really like the idea of it being more of a practical reason. Now, generally speaking, I've read somewhere that druids won't wear metal because they like to use things that you can find in nature, like leather or plants or things like that. Now, metal is still found in nature, so that's why I don't 100% buy it, although the way they explain it is that it's still man-made, so I kind of buy that to a certain extent. But the reason that I'm sold in terms of why they practically won't wear metal armor is because of their ability to wild shape. Because if you wear metal armor, then basically if you wild shape, especially if you go into a larger animal like a bear or an owlbear or a tiger or something like that, the armor is probably going to constrict that animal shape, or it's going to break completely, and so it's pretty much useless, and it really deters you in battle what you can do. Which also explains why they won't wear metal armor, but they can wield metal weapons, because metal weapons, you can just drop it before you wild shape and it's not going to destroy it. Wearing metal armor as a druid doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it's one of those things where it was part of their lore to connect them and commune them to nature, but it's probably more of a good driving reason why you might want to have your druid not wear metal armor, or wear something a little bit more practical. Now, with that said, any other armor that they wear or clothing, could that actually get destroyed? Yeah. So practically speaking, that still doesn't hold up necessarily, but I can see how it's easier for them to shape out of clothes that are a little bit more durable, flexible versus metal that can still be constrictive. But then why won't they use metal shields? And so this is the rabbit hole that you can really go down if you're trying to answer a loaded question like this that seems to be simple on the surface, but the more you look into it, the more complex it kind of gets. And the fact that this is a game where you can really, make up any reason that you want, and you don't have to stick with what the justification was, especially if you work this out with your game master and with your other players. You can come up with a lot of great, interesting ways to explain this, or, just come up with a story that allows your character to really thrive under that sort of understanding of why a druid may or may not use metal armor. And so you can go a lot of different avenues. If we went back down to the explanation of they took an oath to a deity, I think maybe Sylvanas or a different one, that they would never wear metal armor, then you still have to justify why metal armor, but metal swords or metal weapons are completely fine. But I think it's a lot of fun to look at the different kinds of explanation and rationales to why druids may not wear metal armor, and kind of expand on that, and maybe even dive further and give your own twist as to why that might be. And maybe it's adding on to those existing lore. Maybe it's something completely different that hasn't been explored before. Maybe it's using something practical, and then even explaining why your character may not follow what other druids do, and give them like a little bit of a renegade sense of a character if you want to play it that way. I'm just really excited about this character I made that's a half-orc druid, because I don't think we see those a lot or very often at all. In fact, it usually suggests that they become a barbarian because of some of the traits and feats that they have that would really lend itself to that class. But I think taking that sort of race and applying it to a class that they don't typically go together, I think is a lot of fun. And then when you add that added element of the druids typically not wearing metal armor, just provides a lot of opportunity to explore what kind of backstory, what kind of character you might want to create that sounds really interesting that you can roleplay with. And as I mentioned, I've only been doing Dungeons & Dragons for a while, so there's still a lot more for me to learn, but I'm hoping that you'll join me in my journey, especially if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons as I'm learning about this. If you have any thoughts or anything that you want to share about druids and metal armor versus metal weapons, definitely leave a comment below. I'd be more than happy to check those out, have a conversation, maybe even do another follow-up video to talk about this a little bit more and further in depth as well too. So